So welcome everyone to our IJ4EU information webinar, which is becoming something of a regular event. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. This is an opportunity to answer any questions that you may have about the IJ4EU program in general, as well as the two grant schemes that are now open for applications with a deadline of October 13th, plus other forms of support on offer as we proceed with this current edition of IJ4EU. So thanks again for joining. I'm Timothy Large, the head of independent media programs at the International Press Institute in Vienna. And IPI is one of three organizations that run the consortium that runs IJ4EU. And I'm delighted to have on this call my colleague, Melitza, who is also at IPI and works very closely on the IJ4EU program. And we also have colleagues from the other consortium partners. So that would be Zlatina from the European Journalism Center, and Denise and Andreas from the European Center for Press and Media Freedom. And we'll be hearing from all of those today as we take you through this quickly, so we have plenty of time to get to your answers. So please feel free to type into either the chat or the Q&A function any questions you might have, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. And in the meantime, I will kick off with just a general overview and then some information about the investigation support scheme, which is the grant scheme which IPI runs. So just as a way of introduction, you may or may not know, I know that some of you are probably old hands at IJ4EU, and some may be coming to it for the first time. So you probably know that what we are all about is supporting cross-border investigative journalism in Europe. We believe in the power of watchdog journalism as a public good, something that's worthy of support. And we believe in the power of collaboration to work on some of these transnational stories that are increasingly becoming important in our times of trouble. Our goal is to help create a vigorous and a rigorous news ecosystem across the continent. And as I say, at a time when there are more pressures on watchdog investigative journalism than ever before. And these range from financial pressures to political pressures to legal threats and actual risks, threats of intimidation and violence and so on. The list goes on, and we're doing everything we can to try to create a supportive environment, both with money and other kinds of support, to allow this very important work to continue. So IJ4EU is now in its fourth year. To date, we've dispersed more than 2.5 million euros in grants, along with other forms of support that you'll hear about. And we've helped hundreds of individual journalists and newsrooms all across the EU, and indeed other countries, to carry out really ambitious cross-border projects, the kinds of things that are very hard to do unless you have the time, the money, and in some cases, the backing, the sort of practical support to make it happen. And these investigations have had a real impact. They've changed policy, they've created public debate, they've resounded across Europe, shall we say. And in the current edition of IJ4EU, which spans 2022 and 2023, we now have 1.23 million euros to give away just in grants. And then we have additional money for other forms of support, which you'll hear about, including awards, the IJ4EU Impact Awards, and a number of networking opportunities and other things, but we'll get to that in a second. It's probably worth spelling out at the beginning where all this money comes from, in full transparency. 90% of the funding for IJ4EU comes from the European Commission, hence the focus on Europe. And the other 10% or so comes from philanthropic co-funders. At the moment, we have co-funding from Open Society Foundations, Fritt Ord Foundation, the Fondation Nicholas Pusch, and also the City of Leipzig in Germany. Now, at this point, I always like to stress something which is really important, and that is that this money comes with no strings attached whatsoever. Editorial independence is very sacred to us. It's the cornerstone of IJ4EU. And we're quite proud to have developed a really tried and tested model to channel public and philanthropic money to journalists all across the continent without any question of influence. So there's a very strong firewall in place between the donors on the one hand and the grantees on the other hand. And indeed, even between the implementing partners, so the consortium partners, IPI, EJC, and ECPMF, even we have no influence at all over how this money is spent. We're here to support you, but we're not here to influence. So editorial guaranteed is absolutely sacrosanct. And I think that this has been a very successful part of IJ4EU. And some of the proof of that is the sheer number of investigations that have taken a very hard line and gone after EU institutions, for example, and been very critical of the very, shall we say, the hand that, that bits the hand that feeds them, as the old expression says. So let's talk about the money. At the center of the program are these two grant schemes. And in a minute, I'll hand over to Zlatina to discuss the Freelancer support scheme, which is open to teams made up primarily of freelancers. And it comes with extra layers of support in addition to money. But I'd like to talk about the investigation support scheme. And then we'll hand over to Denise and Andreas from ECPMF to talk about other forms of support, including legal support and the conference and other things. So the investigation support scheme is the larger of the two grant schemes. It's run by IPI and it's open to anybody at all. So teams of any configuration whatsoever. In the past, it's had certain rules that it has to have a newsroom element and so on. This year, it can be freelancers, it can be newsrooms plus freelancers, it can be any combination of journalists and news organizations. And we have this year 900,000 to give away under this scheme through two calls, the current one, which is open until the middle of October, and another call in January. So we'll be giving away about 450,000-ish for each call. And because these can be quite large grants, that's typically sort of 12 to 15, 16, 17 projects, something like that, funded under each call. So let's start by talking about eligibility. And there's always the slightly confusing issue of geographical eligibility because it keeps changing from year to year. This year, I'm pleased to say it's relatively simple. And maybe at this point, Melissa, can we get that graphic up just so we can sort of show visually how it looks? Great. There it is. So now, because it's an EU-funded project primarily, you won't be surprised to hear that primarily we're funding teams who are based in EU countries. So you have to have a cross-border element, which means you need to have at least one team member. And when I say team member, I mean it could be an individual journalist, a freelancer, or an individual staff journalist, or it could be an entire news organization. But you need to have at least one team member in one EU country and at least one in another EU country. And that's perfectly fine. Unlike last year, I'm happy to say EU candidate countries are also fully eligible. So the only thing is you have to be in a combination of at least one EU country and at least one candidate country. And of course, there are now 7 EU candidate countries now that Ukraine and Moldova have become candidate countries. So you can imagine a situation where you have, for example, a newsroom in, I don't know, Belgium and a freelancer in North Macedonia, that would be eligible. You couldn't have a newsroom in North Macedonia and a newsroom in Turkey. You would still need to have that EU element. So it needs to be at least one EU country plus a candidate country. And then finally, people often ask about the rest of the world, third countries. Well, they are welcome to take part. And when I say third countries, I'm now including the United Kingdom in that list. Some of you may remember that last year, the United Kingdom was considered eligible on the same terms as EU countries. And that had to do with the technicalities of funding budgets that had been prepaid under previous EU budgets the EU had paid into. This year, sad to say for anybody in the UK, They get no special treatment. They are considered like any other third country, and welcome to take part as long as the core geographical eligibility is met. So any combination of EU plus EU or EU plus candidate country and third countries as well. The only catch is that the involvement of those third countries has to be relevant to an EU audience. So ultimately, let's just remember that this is called the Investigative Journalism for Europe program, and ultimately we're trying to create journalism that resonates in Europe mainly. Having said that, there are many examples of stories that have had teams with members based all over the world. So thanks, Melissa. Thank you for putting those slides up. Oh yes, and there's just a reminder of exactly where those countries are. So that's EU countries plus candidate countries. So great, thank you very much for that. So what kind of teams can apply? The answer for the investigation support scheme, and it's a little bit different for the freelancer support scheme, as Zartina will explain in a minute, but the answer for the investigation support scheme is any type of team at all, as I said, and we're talking about any type of media as well. So it can be text, it can be broadcasting, it can be podcasting, it can be fancy web documentaries, it can be radio, all kinds of media from anywhere in Europe are allowed to apply. And you might find this interesting, just to know some examples of kinds of collaborations that we've seen in the past, just to get your head around the kinds of configurations you might want to be involved with, or you might already be involved with. A couple of years ago, we had an independent evaluation of the IJ4EU program, and this evaluation identified 4 types of collaborative models, which mainly benefited from IJ4EU. And the first type, they called it a mainstream media-led model. And this is where you have typically quite a big news outlet, a traditional news outlet, like a big broadcaster or a big newspaper, and they take the lead on the project, but they recruit a freelancer here, another news organization there, and they basically build a project which they lead around a particular subject. And we've had some very interesting examples of that type of mainstream media-led model. We also have what they call the multi-networked model. And this is where you have hubs of journalists who typically work for various media outlets or investigative organizations. They might be big newspapers, or they might be very small specialist investigative organizations. And they essentially create a team, a bespoke team of investigators for a particular project, and they're all assigned different tasks. And they come up with a dynamite investigation, which they then syndicate out to various media partners. Then you have what they call the grassroots model. And this is where you mainly have freelance journalists who they come up with an idea from scratch. They say, okay, we want to do a big story on this. And they essentially build a team by recruiting other freelancers in different countries. So they say, okay, we're going to need somebody in Romania. So let's recruit somebody there. We're going to need somebody in Spain. So let's recruit somebody there. And they come up with a joint project. And I think this kind of grassroots model is very well served by the freelancer support scheme that you'll hear about in a minute. And the final model was called by the evaluation, the investigation service model. And this is where you have investigative journalism groups that are typically charities. They're typically registered as NGOs. And so think of, for example, the Burn Network or OSU-CRP, or I suppose Investigate Europe might be an example of that. And they consist of journalists based in different countries, and they come together to work on specific projects, often with great success. So I wouldn't be surprised if this year we see all 4 of those models served. We do like to have a range of projects, a range of team types, and we're very keen to help those who really need the most support. So that's often at the sort of the freelancer end of things, which is why, as Latina will explain, there is an extra layer of support for freelancers working at that grassroots level. So let's talk about topics. Topics must be, of course, of cross-border relevance, and they must be in the public interest. And because this is investigative journalism, they must reveal something that is new. Other than that, there is nothing for me to say about topics. All topics are eligible. It is wide open. We do not favor corruption over environment or public health over security. It's all fair game. It's basically, the stories that are selected tend to boil down to what the independent jury considers to be the most newsworthy, the best stories. So all topics are relevant. And indeed, if you look at the projects section of the IJ4EU website, ij4eu.net/projects, you'll see a great range of topics covered. So that's it for the ISS, the Investigation Support Scheme, except just to talk about the money. These are large grants, although they don't have to be large grants. So we offer grants of between 5,000 euros at the smaller end, right up to 50,000 euros at the larger end, and anything in between. And it's worth stressing that this money can be used for pretty much anything. And I think this is something that makes IJ4EU slightly different from other grant schemes, which tend to be a bit more restrictive in how money can be spent. For us, this is the closest we can come to providing something resembling core funding. And what I mean by that is that you can take a large amount of money, say 50,000 euros, and use it to pay staff, even salaried staff at newsrooms. You can use it for overhead costs, for electricity, for those kinds of administrative costs that are often excluded from other grant schemes, which only tend to cover travel and project-related costs and so on. There are a couple of exceptions. You can't buy hardware like a new laptop or something like that. But on the whole, the money can be used for pretty much anything. And the other thing is you can apply for 100% of funding or a lesser amount. We welcome co-funding. So if you have a project that's funded by a journalism fund or another foundation or something like that, absolutely fine to have IJ4EU funding on top of that. We just ask that you include everything transparently in the budget. And in fact, we provide a template budget, which you're welcome to use. And perhaps Melissa can share that budget template for you to have a look at. All of this stuff is, of course, available online as well on the IJ4EU site. In terms of publication requirements, we ask, in the similar spirit of the cross-border teams, we ask that you publish or broadcast in at least 2 countries, again, at least 2 EU countries, or at least 1 EU country and 1 EU candidate country, and further afield if you like. And that's pretty much it. You have 6 months about to complete your project from the time of getting funding. But I must say we are really quite relaxed about these rules. We understand that investigative journalism is a movable feast. It's very, flexibility is the order of the day because things change and it's not an exact science. So we tend to be as relaxed as we possibly can, but we do ask you to try to complete the investigations within 6 months. So how do you apply? Well, we have a platform, an online platform, which is called Good Grants. And the reason we've chosen Good Grants is because it's extremely secure. And I'd like to just say a word about security. We take this very seriously. I've been involved in other grant programs where in the selection process, you'll see PDFs printed out and emailed between people and endless documents. None of that happens with IJ4EU. Everything is kept within the extremely secure online Good Grants platform. And even the judging of the proposals is done by the jury members within that platform. No information leaves the platform. And if it does, it would only ever be between us, the implementing partners, and you, the grantees. And anything sensitive would always be transmitted through a secure end-to-end encrypted channel, such as Signal. And we do take this very seriously because we understand that a lot of these investigations are sensitive and possibly dangerous. So we take your information very seriously. You would need to choose a lead applicant who would submit the proposal. And in fact, you can go in now and create a kind of a test application form in the Good Grants platform where you can see all the sections that you need to fill in. For example, we'll ask you to describe your team, to describe your project, explain why it's new and why it's relevant. Those are two very important parts of your application. We'll ask you to lay out a research and publication plan, and we'll ask you to submit a budget and a risk assessment. And we also ask for what we call letters of intent from publishers. These are informal commitments, and I say they're informal, they're not binding, just to show that you've reached out to a media partner and they've said, oh, this sounds like an interesting story. If it comes to fruition, as you've described, we would be interested in potentially publishing this. So as I say, the deadline for publication is October 13th at 1 minute to midnight. And the next call will be in January. And if you feel that you're not quite ready to submit an application for this round, and you'd rather do it in January, it's worth mentioning that in October, we will be holding public masterclass, what we call cross-border masterclasses, which help you, help anybody refine story ideas, find partners in other countries, and really raise the quality of your application to give it as good a chance of getting funded as possible. So I would encourage you, if you're not quite ready at this stage to submit an application, maybe think about joining one of those free online masterclasses. It could help to strengthen your application. Okay, so that's basically it. As I mentioned, an independent jury will select the application, the proposals for funding. And then we will announce the winners shortly after that. The deadline or the timeline is something like, I think the jury will meet at the very end of October or the very beginning of November, and we will make the announcement within a few days of their meeting. So I think I'm ready now to hand over to Zlatina to talk about the Freelancer support scheme, and then we'll get on to the other forms of support and networking opportunities, and then we'll get to your questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for this comprehensive overview of the IJ4EU fund and the specifics of the investigation support scheme, because this actually makes my job a lot easier. So thanks again. Hi, everyone. I'm Zlatina. I am a program lead at the European Journalism Center, or the EJC. And the EJC, as already mentioned, is one of the consortium partners within the IJ4EU fund. We're based in the Netherlands, and we support journalism in Europe and beyond. And within the IJ4EU consortium, we are responsible for the Freelancer support scheme, which is the second grant scheme of IJ4EU, and it is designed to support cross-border teams that are made up of freelance journalists. The total budget that will be distributed by this grant is 330,000 euros. Again, it will be distributed under two funding calls. The current one, which is open, a good opportunity to remind of the deadline for application, open until the 13th of October. And then there will be a second call expected in January next year. The calls will run in parallel with the calls for the investigation support scheme. Together with the funding, what the Freelancer support scheme offers is also specialized training, mentoring, and networking opportunities for the successful teams. In terms of geographical eligibility criteria, publication requirements, eligibility of topics and formats to be supported, everything is the same and just as Tim described it. So I will not spend too much on it, apart from maybe repeating the geographical eligibility criteria, because I also saw that there are a couple of questions in the chat around that. So to be eligible, teams need to involve team members based in at least 2 EU member states, or at least 1 EU member state and 1 official EU candidate country. Applicants or team members that are based in third countries, UK being considered the third country as well, are more than welcome, but they still need to team up with team members from another 2 EU member states, or 1 EU member state and 1 EU candidate. So if you're a freelance journalist based in Turkey, you can, for example, have a partner in Belgium And that is already sufficient to fulfill the geographic eligibility criteria. If you're based in the UK or in Switzerland, then you still need to team up with team members in 2 EU countries, like Belgium and Germany, let's say, or Belgium and North Macedonia. So this is what it would look like as an example. I don't see any objections, so I think I got this right without having to refer to the to the slide with the visualization. But then you may wonder if everything is the same in terms of eligibility criteria and requirements, then why do we actually have a second grant, and what are the differences compared to the investigation support scheme? And I will try to elaborate on this a little bit. Well, first, this is the grant scheme that is the space for freelance-only teams, where we have tried to adapt to the conditions and the support that we offer to the needs of freelance journalists. Something which the EJC has been trying to do in the context of different programs over the last years, and something that we successfully integrated within IJ4EU together with our partners. The second difference is the maximum grant amount. So here, under the freelancer support scheme, the maximum grant amount is set at 20,000 euros. And of course, smaller budgets and smaller scale investigations that require less resources are more than welcome. And third, that was already touched on by Tim, there is an additional layer of support in the form of mentorship and training that will be available to the grantees in the course of the implementation of their projects. As I just mentioned, and some of you may know that we already had one edition of the freelancer support scheme last year, and based on internal, external evaluation, based on the feedback that we received, we believe that we're on the right track with it and that it's worth keeping it as an element of IJ4EU. At the same time, we're also learning along the way, and we're trying to find ways of improving and answering applicants' needs in the best possible way. So we have made some adjustments from last year. One of them is how we define freelance-only teams. And for example, if you're a staff journalist or if you're employed part-time at a news organization, you still can apply to the freelancer support scheme as long as you will work in an individual capacity on the proposed investigation. That is one thing. And the second thing was also already mentioned by Tim. Last year, freelance-only teams were only eligible to apply to our grant, or to the smaller grant, as it is also known. While this year, we let applying teams decide which grant scheme suits their needs better. What does it mean? That a team composed entirely of freelancers is welcome and encouraged to apply to the freelancer support scheme, but they're not obliged to. So you might decide to submit an application to the investigation support scheme instead, but please choose only one. Don't submit one proposal to both grants. That might be the case if, for example, your estimated budget is about 20,000 euros, then the investigation support scheme is your logical choice. And another option is if you believe that the additional form that we offer in the form of mentorship and training is really not something that you would like to benefit from. So these are the possible scenarios. Other than that, just like with the investigation support scheme, the application process for the freelancer support scheme is via Good Grants. We're using the same platform. The winning projects are selected by an external independent jury, and then grantees have 6 months to complete their projects. And during these 6 months, they will be able to benefit from mentorship and training opportunities. And what do these look like? Just very quickly. Once the projects are selected, we will assign a mentor to each team, and mentors will have expertise in different aspects of investigative journalism, like data journalism or open source intelligence, etc. We have already incorporated some questions in the application form to ask applicants what kind of external support they might benefit from. We will also base the decision on the jury feedback throughout the evaluation process. And then, of course, we will consult with the winning team. So it will be a collaborative process, not just a unilateral decision in which we assign a mentor to a team. From their own, mentors will commit to being available on particular days for calls, emails, online meetings. They will commit approximately 1 day or 1.5 days per month on average to their mentees. And it will be up to the mentor and to their team to decide how frequently they will meet, how they will interact, etc. We realize that this is not a lot, but as a time commitment, but we believe, and this is what our experience shows, that it adds value and can make a difference. And the role of the mentor, as we understand it, is to provide guidance, motivation, support. A mentor may help with setting goals, developing contacts, identifying resources, etc. They're there to be your counselors and also a listening ear and a sounding board in the course of the implementation of your investigations. In addition to the mentoring program, the EJC will also...
I don't know if it's just me or are other people losing Lassina as well? Agree. Seem to have a frozen, maybe I'm frozen.
You are frozen.
Sorry.
But not anymore.
Okay.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Sorry, I thought it was you.
Okay, I hope that, you were able to hear everything I had to share about the mentorship, because I was making sure to be as brief as possible, but also to provide the essence that we have tried to incorporate. But yeah, just to end, in addition to the mentoring program, we will organize 2 online expert calls for each cohort of grantees. And these are basically Ask Me Anything sessions with experts in field that are relevant to investigative journalism. And the specific topics, again, we will choose and decide on after the winning projects are selected and after we have heard from the grantees what particular areas they might be interested in. But this is in a nutshell what we have in mind with the freelancer support scheme. If you're not sure whether this is the right fit for you, or if you're sure that it is, but you're unclear about the application process or form, or if you are just interested in receiving any more details, please reach out to me. You can leave your question now in the chat, or you can reach me by email. I will also put my email in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Slatina. That's great. We'll get to these questions in just a minute, but let's go now to Denise from European Centre for Press and Media Freedom.
Hi, everyone. I should start by apologizing for my voice. It comes and goes, and hopefully it will last for the next 5 minutes. I would much rather share a PowerPoint with you. I'm much better with a screen in front of me. Let's see, can you see my screen now? Maybe I should go to the first page though, right? Here we go. So I am the IJ4EU program manager at the ECPMF, European Centre for Press and Media Freedom. The third consortium partner of IJ4EU. As ECPMF, what we do is to organize the Uncovered Conference and the IJ4EU Impact Award. I'll talk about this too, and then my colleague Andreas will tell you briefly about the legal support that we provide the IJ4EU grantees, as well as Media Freedom Rapid Response Program. So let's start with the Impact Award, which is devoted to cross-border investigative journalism, and it awards a total of 15,000 euros to 3 teams each year. So each team gets 5,000 euros for their high-quality cross-border investigative works. To go through the eligibility criteria very quickly, the award is open for investigations published via any credible medium in any language. So they can be published in print form or broadcast television, radio. They can be published online as documentaries or as multimedia works. They could have been published in any language, but for the nomination, they have to be, at least the core investigation has to be translated into English, or a summary of the investigation should be provided in English. One important thing to highlight is that the nominees should not be, they don't have to be IJ4EU, former IJ4EU grantees. This award is open to any investigation. The investigation should have been published between 1st of October 2021 and 30th of September 2022. So they should have been published basically within a period of a year before the nominations opened, to say roughly. The most important thing, I guess, is, as highlighted by Tim previously, the geographical eligibility. The same criteria applies here. The teams, the cross-border teams, should include journalists from at least 2 EU member states, or at least 1 EU member state and 1 EU candidate country. This also applies for the topic of the investigation. The focus of the investigation should basically be of common interest to citizens of at least 2 EU member states, or 1 EU member state and a candidate country. Am I missing anything? I don't think I do. So I can move to my next slide, which basically defines when the nominations will open, which is not so far away. In about 20 days, the nominations will open. They will last slightly bit more than a month. So between 10th of October to 14th of November this year, the nominations will be open. And you can nominate either your own investigation or your favorite investigation by another team. So if you know an investigative team whose work you think deserves to be acknowledged, deserves a little bit of extra cash, this is also your chance to nominate them. And we will use exactly the same platform, the Good Grants platform that Tim highlighted just a bit before. So what happens when you nominate your investigation or somebody else's investigation is that once the nomination period is closed, an academic expert will go through a pre-evaluation process, and based on certain criteria, which I will just note in a second, they will create a short list of nominations. Their criteria will be, of course, quality, innovative use of cross-border journalistic technique, newsworthiness, storytelling techniques, cross-border effectiveness, and as the name indicates, the impact of the investigation. Once the shortlist is there and ready, which should be by early February, the shortlisted applications or nominations will go to an independent jury, which may consist of different sorts of experts, including academics, media lawyers, or journalists who are maybe all journalists or continually practicing their jobs as journalists. In the previous years, we had in our jury Sean Walker, Christian Jensen, Attila Monk, Julia Wernersen, John Dundar, and many more, but just to highlight a couple of names. This year's nominees will be announced next year in 2023 in spring during the MFRR Summit. I guess Andreas will tell you a little bit about this as well, the work of MFRR and what MFRR Summit will include. But before he does that, maybe I should name a couple of winners from past years. That's also nice to know. So in the last 2 years of IJ4EU Impact Award, we had the following projects as winners. In 2021, it was Lost in Europe, the Daphne project, Fraud Factory, and Troika Laundromat. And last year it was the Pegasus project, Frontex complicit in pushbacks, and Logbook of Moria. And finally, we also had Cities for Rent, which got honorable mention by the jury, which was a bonus, but it was a lovely gesture, basically celebrating yet another great example of investigative, cross-border investigative journalism. So your project or your favorite investigative piece from last year, from this past year, can also be among the winners of 2023. Which brings me to Uncovered Conference, which was hosting the IJ4EU Impact Award up until earlier this year. This time, it will not host the Impact Award. It will give the stage to MFRR to do so, but instead, it will host a bunch of other great things. So Uncovered is basically the annual conference of IJ4EU. And last year we were in Berlin and we had two great, I say last year, but it was in 2022. So this year, earlier this year, we were in Berlin and we had this great venue at the foot of the Brandenburg Gate. And we hosted many IJ4EU grantees who showcased their own projects. We talked about, for example, SLAPs and how it so severely impacts journalists and what can be done to prevent them, to take the burden of the journalists' shoulders. We had great experts among us to do so. Or we had donors who told us about other potential ways to finance investigative project. And finally, just to give an example, we had a workshop on mental health of journalists with Dart Center. So it's basically Uncovered hosts a great variety of different panels focusing on various issues that are relevant to investigative journalists, particularly cross-border investigative journalists. Next year, Uncovered will take place in Brussels, and not in spring, but in autumn. And it will offer a networking opportunity for basically IJ4EU grantees, but also for other investigative journalists, policymakers, academics, and members of civil society. It will offer a platform to discuss challenges and new challenges and new opportunities for cross-border investigative journalists. It will once again showcase IJ4EU grantees investigative project and basically discuss ways of promoting investigative journalism. IJ4EU has an allocated budget to invite its grantees, but this will be a larger topic to be discussed in the future, and it will be done by an open call once we know who our next grantees will be. That's practically all from my side. I will leave the stage to Andreas at this point.
Thank you, Denise.
Could I manage to stop sharing my screen? Yes, I did.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm Andreas, Deputy Director of ECPMF, and also partly involved in this program. I would like to give you a little bit an overview about the support offers you can expect from this program, as well as from the Media Freedom Rapid Response. You have to know that the IJ4EU program is part of a bigger budget provided by the EU, where also practical support and direct support for journalists is part of the funding scheme from the EU. And we have a special dedicated legal support in the IJ4EU program, and I will show you just a few information from my side. If I find my presentation, here we are. So I think it's a legal support program, which is very similar to the legal support program run by the Media Freedom Rapid Response Mechanism. The MFR is also a consortium where IPI is part of, and other big organizations like Free Press Unlimited, European Federations of Journalists, OBCT in Italy, and Article 19, they partner of this big program. And we are running a legal support program, like mentioned before. This gives you the chance to react to unforeseen legal cases. If you check the application form and the budgets you have to prepare in advance, you will see that there is already something foreseen, like legal lecturing and stuff like this. Correct me, Tim, if I'm wrong, but I think this has to be part of the investigation of the program you hand in. But in case something happens during the publication process or some unforeseen costs occur to you, then you can come, and the legal support program, which is tailored to the IJ4EU program, will jump in and cover costs depending on the needs of the certain case or the certain threat you are facing in the legal sense for your investigation. This is, we decided to do this, especially with the IJ4EU program, that we have dedicated money allocated for you, for the grantees who will be benefiting from this program. And if this is not enough money, we still have the money available, which is available under the Media Freedom Rapid Response Mechanism. And I think it's really easy what you have to do in case of an unforeseen legal threat. You can just reach out to the ECPMF. There is currently a budget available of 65,000 euros within the MFR3, the current running project, and you apply through a web form. And yeah, usually in 30 days, you have an answer. This is something similar to a kind of evaluation process. There is a committee which do a pre-evaluation, is checking all the backgrounds, and then deciding if and how much money you will receive to fight the legal threat. In case it's something really direct related to the IJ4EU, there is another way. Just reach out to EJC or IPI, and then they will forward everything to us. So I think that's the even more easy way for all the grantees within this. But you already see the budget is a little bit limited. This is because of the experiences we had in the last years. So that's why it's distributed in a little different portion between the IJ4EU program and the Media Freedom Rapid Response program. For the MFR, I have to say there are no eligibility criteria. You have to be part of the EU or a member state candidate country, so you can apply also with legal cases outside of the IJ4EU program for this. And beside the legal support program, I think that's also something which is really interesting. This is a huge support program, and we have a kind of different activities within this program. We have kind of monitoring, which is a core of all activities. We are monitoring all press and freedom violations in Europe and in candidate countries. Also since beginning of the year, since March, also threats in Ukraine, in Moldova and other countries, they became part of our monitoring area. We do a comprehensive report every half year to show the latest development in these different countries. Then out of this, we react with certain activities like support offers. We have this big support program, like the legal support program I mentioned before. This gives you not only funding to fight a court case, but it also gives you legal advice. It helps you to set up a kind of strategy, gives you access to policymakers, to lawmakers, gives you kind of legal support whole package. So also guidance in case you have some questions or whatever it's needed. So I think it's not just giving you money to go to court, or if you have to go to court, that we can pay the lawyer, but it's more, it's the whole package of legal support you can expect from an NGO fighting for press and media freedom. And I think one of the bigger part, or the biggest part of the program, is practical support to journalists. This includes a lot of different services like medical assistance, supporting of living costs. We have psychological support. Also some living support for families is included, and also preventive measures, trainings, security trainings, digital security trainings. Everything is included in this package. It's just easy to go on the website to find what you need. You can also apply through the MFRR website if you need support in any kind of help for practical support for your work or for your colleagues or for whatever journalist you are. I think there are also other programs. They are on a global scale. And I think the special part of the MFR project is that it's tailored to the needs of the journalists within Europe, within the European Union and the candidate countries. So there is a dedicated budget for them. We know that the situation is critical on a global scale, but this program is reacting to the needs of the journalists in Europe. Part of the practical support also is a residency program, which is set up to empower the journalists that they can go back to work. We give them a 3 to 6 months time period where they can step out of the current surroundings. They can come to Leipzig. In this case, they can recharge the batteries and get training, get health insurance and everything what they need. And after the 3 to 6 months, they can go back in their home country to continue their work. So I think it's also a really good tool, and it's running on a constant basis. You can apply for this, and then you will also be selected because of certain criteria. And then you can just take part in this program. I mentioned already the training programs, which are provided by the European Federation of Journalists. There's a dedicated training fund. So this gives kind of different safety trainings on the ground. It helps to strengthen the work of every journalist and also stress some important new topics in this field. And yeah, of course, advocacy work is part of this project as well, because I think we are not there to only fight or help journalists under threat, but we also see us as a project which create an environment which is safe and is helpful for the work. So it's something similar we do with the IJ4EU project. It's not just giving money, but we are creating an environment which shows that this part of activity is important. And this is done by advocacy work, also with all the partners in this network. So we react to, we go on the ground, we have exchange with local stakeholders, but also with the European stakeholders. We monitor, we check the implementation of different laws and strategies and so on. And if you have any kind of questions, you can reach out via the website, via mfr.eu, where you find all the contacts, but also you can send a direct email to Gürkan, which is our coordinator for the Media Freedom Rapid Response. His email is gürkan.özturan@ecpmf.eu. So, or follow us on Twitter, following the hashtag MediaFreedomRR to come to this. I think this gives a short overview about what the Media Freedom Rapid Response is doing and how this program is also supporting the work of the IJ4EU program, because both programs go hand in hand, which you can already see that IPI is together in both programs with ECPMF. So I think this gives a strong collaboration through all the projects, and this supports the work you're doing and also the work of all the other journalists. That's from my side, and I will hand over back to Tim. Thanks.
Thanks, Andreas, and thanks, Denise, for that very nice overview. Okay, let's get to your questions now. They've been building up in the chat. Militza, what questions do we have building up? Do you want to read out a couple, and I'll see if we can tackle them?
Yeah, I was trying to rearrange and maybe reorganize them, because some are mostly about the budget and money, the others are mostly about geography. So let's start with the money, with the budget. Okay, here's the question. If the budget is granted, what happens next? Where does the money go? Do you have standards for spending or handling the budget by, for example, a specific person?
Great question. Okay, so we get to the technicalities of how the money flows. So put simply, this is what happens. You get the grant, and we agree a contract essentially between the implementing partner. So let's say it's an investigation support scheme grant. We would form a contract between IPI and the lead applicant in the team, who represents the team. And the money would be sent in 3 tranches to that lead applicant, who would then be responsible for dispersing the grant to the team members according to the budget that you submitted as part of your proposal and has been agreed, mutually agreed, as part of our contract. So the lead applicant is in charge of the money. The lead applicant can be an organization or an individual, it doesn't matter. And that's how the money flows. In terms of then reporting back, lightweight as possible. We do ask that you stick to your budget, but we understand that things change, and so we're quite flexible. If there are major changes in budget, we ask that you discuss them with us, and we 100% of the time approve them, unless they're utterly ridiculous. And if they're minor changes, just go ahead and move things around. And that's basically it. At the end of it, we don't require you to submit receipts or anything like that, although we do ask you to keep them. We try to keep this as lightweight as possible. Does that answer the question?
Maybe I can just add that this is 100% valid for the freelancer support scheme as well. That's why we ask you to appoint a lead applicant, and the same applies. Once the contract is signed with the lead applicant, the grant is transferred to them, and they are responsible for the further distribution to the rest of the team. And for the freelancer support scheme, there are 3 payments, 60% upon the conclusion of the contract, and 20% upon the submission of the midterm, and 20% upon the submission of the final report at the end of the project.
That's right. It's slightly different for the investigation support scheme. The percentages are slightly different, but it's also three tranches. And those 3 stages of payment are made according to milestones mutually agreed as part of the work plan. And this is all laid out in the grant agreement. So everything is very crystal clear from the beginning of the project, how the money will flow, when the money will flow, and on what conditions.
And kind of related, Andy asked if the lead applicant has to be based in the EU.
They do, actually. Well, they have to be based in, I believe, an eligible country, which means that either the EU, oh, now hold on, this is tricky. Can they be in a candidate country?
I believe they can be
this time.
in an EU candidate country, because then the second participating organization or a team member will be based in the EU.
Yeah, so we have now, this time, for the first time, total equivalence between EU member states and candidate countries in terms of team member eligibility and team leader sort of eligibility. What they can't be is based in a third country. Now, we've had examples where a team leader who is clearly driving the project is based in a third country, and there's been a kind of, they've appointed essentially a de facto substitute team leader in an eligible EU country to handle the money while they're driving the editorial side of it, say from the UK or New York or something like that. That has happened, and that's okay. Again, that's agreed with us because it makes sense. We try to be as flexible as possible. What we care about is getting these projects done and done well, and not getting too hung up on rules. But we do need to respect the rules of the Commission. So there are usually solutions that if we communicate about them, we can find solutions.
And speaking of projects being done well, here's another question. If we are granted a certain amount and we are not able to present a good investigation at the end of those 6 months, do we need to pay back the money?
That's a great question. And I hesitate to answer this one because I don't want to sort of give carte blanche for the impression that, there'll be no accountability at all and you can keep all the money without an investigation. The truth of the matter is we understand that investigative journalism is at its very core a risky business. Often it depends on making a hypothesis, which may or may not turn out to be substantiated. And a great number of things can get in the way of a story achieving its maximum fruition, shall we say. You might encounter a lawsuit that totally throws the whole thing apart. Data, you may not have access to data that you had hoped to get. A source you may find that a source you were counting on turned out not to be so reliable. Any number of things can happen. We do hope that when you plan your project, you'll be planning for obviously the best story you possibly can get, the maximum story, and sort of plan B, if things don't work out so well, at least there's a minimum story that you can publish that's still interesting and valuable. We would ask you to think in those terms. But if you do your investigation in good faith, staying in contact with us, and abiding by the sort of the work plan that we've mutually agreed about, again, I stress, we're not interfering with your work. We're just trying to create a structure to help you. If you do all of that, and at the end of it, you don't have a story, we're not going to be demanding every penny back. Certainly not. No, we're not. There have been a few cases here and there where we have yet to see a story published. Usually, we had a pretty good track record. It was almost 100%. In the last year, we're still waiting for some stories to be published. I expect they will be, but we're not going to be demanding money back, is the answer. But I say that with a caution. I don't want you to just feel that you can kind of do a half-hearted attempt and then, oh, sorry, no story, we're keeping the money. We would expect there to be a good reason for it not reaching publication.
Okay, more about money. If we get a grant as the budget, will the budget cover exactly what we asked for, or the jury may choose to give less than we asked for?
Yes, good question. The jury does have the right to amend budgets. They might do this for two reasons. One is they might say, well, you know what, this is just too much. This is ridiculous. You're asking for 50,000 when this should really cost 30,000. So we'll amend it to that. Or it might be because they're trying to fund as many projects as they possibly can. So sometimes there's a little bit of financial juggling during the jury process where they say, look, if we just can tweak from a few budgets here and there, we can get another 2 or 3 projects in. So let's look at potential weaknesses in budgets and think, oh, maybe this team doesn't absolutely need to have a data visualization element, or if they need to have it, they can find another way to fund it. Let's ask them to lop 1,000 off there, and maybe this team, it could do without this, and let's find a savings there. They may do some adjusting of budgets. They do it for good reason, if they do it at all, but it's fairly rare. Usually the budgets tend to be, if they're well thought through, they tend to be to sail through.
Okay, if successful, when is the earliest date that teams can use the funds? And what is the maximum amount of time that the funds can be used for? For example, is there a deadline for publication?
Yes. So for the investigation support scheme, and Latina can correct me if it's different for the, well, it might be slightly different for the freelancer support scheme. You can start to use the funds essentially the second the contract is signed and the money is in your bank account. People do sometimes ask, can funds be used retrospectively? So work we've already done, can we pay for that? The answer is not really. We would expect it to be for activities that start from now. And then, yes, there is a deadline for publication, as is mentioned, about 6 months, with some flexibility in that. But what we don't want to have is endless projects with no end in sight. So you want a clear roadmap from here's the funding to here's the hoped for result. For the freelancer support schemes, Latina, is there anything to add?
Actually, nothing to add, because the period is the same, and again, no retrospective spending. So as long as the money is transferred to the grantee's account, which will be within 2 weeks of the signing of the contract, then there are basically 6 months in which teams need to complete their investigation. And if that is not possible for any objective reasons, and as long as we're informed in advance, we may come up with a plan to extend. So we are willing to grant an extension when there is a justifiable reason.
Then there was a question about co-financing. I think, Latina, you answered that one, but maybe it's good to repeat so everybody can hear about the co-financing, if it is allowed for projects, and if there's another donor, are there any restrictions on who can co-finance projects?
Yes, as Latina said, there are no restrictions. It's certainly allowed. It's welcomed, in fact. That's absolutely fine.
And then we have this set of questions about eligibility, depending on where the applicant is coming from which country. We have a journalist based in Geneva, Switzerland, covering mostly UN and international Geneva issues. Am I eligible for this grant opportunity? Then there was a question from Turkey. Like, I'm from Turkey, I don't know any journalist from Europe. Is it possible to have 2 candidate country application without applicant from EU? And another colleague asked from Africa, I'm from Africa, am I eligible for this grant? If yes, will I be able to collaborate with someone from Africa, or does the collaboration involve partners from Europe only?
Okay, great. Thanks for those questions. Let's take them one at a time. For our friends based in Switzerland, of course, Switzerland is considered a third country. So you would need to be collaborating with team members based elsewhere in the EU or candidate countries. So as long as you're part of that team that fulfills the rules, no problem. But it wouldn't be enough just to be, say, a Swiss-based journalist and a journalist based in one EU country. You would need to have an additional third country. For the friends in Turkey, is it enough to be, let's say, Turkey plus, I don't know, Serbia, 2 candidate countries? Would that work? The answer is no, it wouldn't. You would need to have at least 1 EU member state involved in the mix. I believe that's correct. We're not trying to put up obstacles for candidate countries, but one of the key things to bear in mind is every team needs to have at least 1 EU member state involved in it. That's kind of essential because it's coming from EU money. As for journalists based in Africa, again, no problem at all to be part of teams, but you have to meet that core geographical eligibility criteria, which means being part of a team with members, at least 1 EU member state and or EU candidate country. So basically, just remember the golden rule. Have you ticked off the core criteria, i.e. EU member state and candidate countries? If you have, anybody else is welcome to come to the party, no matter where they're from.
Then there's a question I work for international news organization with bureaus across Europe. If I work with a regular freelancer from another EU country, could our application be eligible?
Quick answer, absolutely. Yes, no problem.
There's a question, how can we participate in the master classes?
Good point. I think on the IJ4EU website, there is, or if there isn't, there will be in our events section towards the bottom of the page, details about how you can sign up for the next masterclass, which will be in October.
I just shared the link with the calendar of planned events so that you can see more or less when there are plans. I think next are coming up in October, November, and then next year we'll have some more. So the easiest way is to sign up to our newsletter, and then we'll be sending invitations for these events. And that could be also useful for a colleague from Turkey who said doesn't know any journalists from Europe. Some of the master classes could help with that, to point you where you can find potential partners and apply together. Okay, here we go. If the project can be undertaken in the summer, is it better to apply in January window, as project would likely not be finished until at least 8 months after application deadline?
Sorry, I think I'm having internet troubles. Apologies.
If the project can be only undertaken in the summer, is it better to apply in January window and not now, since the project would likely not be finished until at least 8 months after the application deadline?
Yes, so if I understand that correctly, the project will start in the summer of 2023. So if you get the funding now, you'd be well beyond the 6-month deadline for publication. So yes, I think it would be better to go for the next one probably.
As a project manager of the team, can I apply for the grant, or do I have to let one of the journalists apply, since I will be hired by the team?
Okay, so I believe this question, if I remember correctly, comes from Coco, who's an experienced project manager of cross-border collaborative investigations. So thanks for that, Coco. You would be okay to, I don't think it's ever happened before. I think this would be setting a precedent, but there's no reason why you couldn't be the team leader. I don't think we have a restriction that says you must be a, quote, journalist to be the team leader. So that's okay. We recognize that investigations comprise many different talents and types of people. It's not just, what shall we say, old school journalists who are involved. So it makes perfect sense for a project manager to be a team leader in certain circumstances. So don't let that stop you.
Speaking of old school journalists, here's another one. Do applicants need to be journalists, and in which sense? In Italy, for example, the specification and proof is different than in other EU countries. So,
yes.
and a similar question also, there's from Marta asking, are NGOs eligible, either as lead applicant or a member of a consortium? I mean NGOs that are not necessarily journalism oriented or a newsroom, but interested in conducting investigations and raising awareness of themes of public interest.
These are very good and slightly tricky questions to answer. It comes up. Let me tell you how we see it from the point of view of IJ4EU. We certainly don't mind whether you're working for an NGO or whether you're working for a traditional legacy media outlet, whether you're a freelancer, or whether you're, I don't know, somebody in Italy, say, whose journalistic credentials are not as clear as they might be in another country where you say I have a press pass. The way we measure this is, are you generating journalism? Are you doing investigative journalism? And by that, I mean not advocacy, not policy, but is it investigative journalism? So absolutely, if you work for an NGO, whether it's an investigative NGO or any other type of NGO, if you are carrying out and producing real investigative journalism, which is essentially fact-based, impartial. You may have an advocacy agenda, but the journalism itself is fact-based and impartial. We have no problem with that at all. Certainly the rules don't forbid any of that. I'll just say, though, as a slight aside, that may be the IJ4EU perspective, but every independent jury is comprised of experienced editors and journalists who may have their own views on how the money should be best spent. And to be frank, in the past, sometimes we've had strong applications from NGOs, for example, and some of the jury members may have had a little bit of a problem with funding what they would see as an advocacy organization rather than a good old-fashioned journalistic organization, and have been more willing to put the money towards traditional journalism, say. Although we do make very clear at the start of every jury meeting, the rules say that as long as they're producing independent, investigative journalism, then it's okay. But it's ultimately up to the jury to decide. So it kind of depends a little bit on who the jury members are and what other stories are in the mix. I can't give a definitive answer on how well you might fare, but I can say that you're certainly welcome to apply. There's nothing in the rules that would stop you. Any more questions?
Okay, I think this would be the last one. Would IJ4EU welcome a revised EU-based application from a previously successful applicant in order to continue its work as new information has been discovered? Publication would be primarily in the EU.
Simple answer is yes, we would. We don't have anything to say that just because you've received funding before, you can't receive funding again. And there's no problem with, in a sense, a project having a second chapter with new EU funding. And in fact, we've had examples of that, examples of very successful, almost a series of investigations that started with IJ4EU and continued to receive IJ4EU and other support to move the story on, to move the investigation on, to expand or to go in a slightly different direction. So please feel free to apply. Just make it very clear that make clear that this will be a new chapter in a sense. It's something new will be revealed. It's not just more of the same. But as long as you can make the case strongly, I think you'd have a good chance. All right.
I think that's it. I don't see any other questions. If I'm wrong, correct me now.
Okay, well, let's have a look. Are there, feel free also, if anybody wants to turn their microphone on and ask anything or add anything else into the chat, you're more than welcome. And of course, you can reach out to us individually through the emails or the generic emails or the personal emails that we've given.
So that's it.
All right, great. No? Fantastic. Okay, well, last chance. All right, well, thank you very much for taking part, everybody. Thanks to all the consortium partners, and thanks to everybody who attended this webinar. Good luck with your applications. Don't hesitate to get in touch as you're putting them together, the whole process. If you have any questions or any issues, we're very happy to talk to you and help guide you through it. Our intention is to try to give you as good a chance as possible of getting funding. We don't make the decisions, that's up to the juries, but anything we can do to help you get to as strong an application as possible, we're more than happy to help with. So best of luck, and we look forward to seeing the fruits of your labors. See you next time.